All right, what is going on, my friends? We are warming up for my secondary squat, primary deadlift day today. The plan for the day is we have some front squatting, probably with a pause. Let's see, before that I got some calves. Got a hell of a lot of mobility to do before I start on those front squats because I did not have time last night to run through my mobility routine that I always like to do the night before I have squats. I find that if I run through some basic mobility the next day, the amount of work I have to do to get into nice positions on my squat goes down a good bit, which means I get to go out to the gym or go out to the garage and get to squatting a lot quicker. If I kind of check that box the night before and do some of my mobility then, and I find that when my mobility is adequate, squatting, lo and behold, feels like a leg exercise. When my mobility is inadequate, squatting very much just feels like a back exercise. Even though outside looking in, just due to my relatively short legs, I would still be quite upright compared to a lot of people. It still ends up feeling like a back exercise if I'm functioning at a little bit of a mobility deficit. So I very much view that bit of static stretching I throw the night before and as part of my warm-up, as part of my training for my squat. It's part of my approach to achieve a better squat. So that helps me kind of focus on it and make sure I do it consistently. To me, that is part of my training. Because I did not have time, because we drove into town to go to the gym in town last night, just means I have to spend a little bit of extra time getting warm today. Yesterday's training went good. I worked up to my first bench single at 5 plates for the block, so 495. Moved okay. All of my warm-ups were moving very well, so I kind of was looking I kind of had my fingers crossed for like an all-time fastest 5 plates. And I kind of botched my execution, so I didn't get that like speed PR at 5 plates I kind of thought was there on the day, which was a little annoying, but I hit a good back off of 465 pounds for a set of 4 at about RPE 8.5, maybe an 8, but I'm gonna go with 8.5. So that was a big win, but we ended up getting back pretty late. So I gotta take my time warming up today. I've been throwing in a lot of stationary bike. It's been having my knees feel a hell of a lot better just going a fixed distance every single day as part of kind of my conditioning routine. I have a distance that I try to achieve across the whole day on incline treadmill walking at a brisk pace. I have my distance that I try to achieve on the bike every day. And then I have a couple of different like conditioning circuit workouts that I'll probably throw in 2 to 3 times a week to challenge my cardiovascular system in a little bit more of an aggressive way rather than prolonged steady state as I like to do on the bike or on the treadmill. I'll do more of like a HIIT style workout with some bike sprints, with some loaded carries, just so that way my work capacity kind of stays ahead of the ball. But plan for the day, get in some decent front squatting, and then the real big goal, because it is a secondary squat day and a primary deadlift day, is to get some big pulls in. I believe the weight on the bar for the day is 665 pounds. We're gonna see how that goes. I feel pretty good. Optimism is there. It just feels as though it's gonna take me a while to get the body moving and mobile enough to where I can then apply the force like I feel I've got good power today. Just gotta get into good positions, right? Because it's like you can feel strong as shit, and if you're applying that force poorly, you're not gonna have the performance on the day that you probably could and should. So, gonna take my time on both lifts. I've actually started leaning into doing a little bit less work on this day than I have in the past. Or not less work, the training still takes a while, but doing less exercises than I have in the past. It used to be I would do calves, I would do abs, I would do front squats, I would do deadlifts, I would do more abs, and then I would run through a bodybuilding posterior chain and back workout. And one of the things that I always like to tell people about that I kind of needed to remind myself was to ask the question. It's not how many things can I do in a training session. It's how many things can I do really well. And I realized, man, if I do a really good job with my front squats and my deadlifts, I don't know how much ability I have to then run through a hamstring and back workout well. So I would rather move that hamstring and back hypertrophy work to a different day where I can do it well. Because if you're not doing it well, you probably should move it to somewhere where you can. So today is actually the least motions I do on any singular training day, where the main focus is I warm up my ankles with some calf raises, so I train my calves. But the main goal is to get in quality and enough work to get better on front squats, and then quality and then enough work to get better on deadlifts. And anytime I deadlift, I do some abs. It just makes my back feel less shitty, but that is the whole plan for the day. I've moved the back work to kind of be distributed. The number of back working sets I was going to hit, I added that to my upper body days. And then the hamstring work that I was going to hit, I moved that actually over to my squat day. So no work is like completely gone from the program. It's moved to places where I felt like I had the energy to actually execute it properly. And today is more of a heavy compound day. Yeah, more to come. But yeah, this is a workout structure that I am a huge fan of. This idea that, okay, well, our lower body training is going to kind of center around this idea of, well, you squat in some capacity and then you hinge in some capacity. And you can kind of see a similar philosophy if we look at what is the general strength training for weightlifting, right? You do some kind of squatting in some capacity, whether that be high bar back squats or front squats. You drop the bar to the floor and you do some pulls, whether that be clean grip, that be snatch grip, or that might be enough like a high pull, some kind of pulling variation for the day. And I heard that exact same kind of idea mirrored by many time World's Strongest Man finalist, JF Caron. I really like JF Caron a lot. He kind of embodies what I think is cool about kind of like old school, simple strength training done at a very high level. And JF has this very dogmatic philosophy of you come into the gym and you squat and you deadlift. Even if the show you're prepping for doesn't have squats or it doesn't have deadlifts from the floor, these are just foundational strength training movements that we keep present in our program all the way up through the preparation. Now, is this optimal? No. At some point, we really should be backing far off of these heavy compounds that are non-specific to the show. But that being said, ideologically, I really like it. And so I've kind of adopted a similar philosophy where, okay, my lower body day is comprised of I come in and I hit some kind of squatting, whether that be back squatting or front squatting or squatting on a specialty bar, pause, no pause, whatever it is. And then I do some kind of pull, whether that be for strongman, it might be pulls from varied heights. Maybe you could even classify Atlas stone from the floor as your more hinging kind of low back motion for the day. So you have some flexibility there, what is kind of defined as that pulling from the floor. But I kind of like that framework. There's nothing magical about it at all. I think that I've done a reasonably good job on this channel providing you guys this idea that what I do is certainly not the only way. There are so many different ways that we can twist those knobs of volume, frequency, intensity, exercise selection to drive forward progress. I'm not telling you this is the only way. I'm not telling you this is the best way. It is just a way that I like. And I think it is, part of the reason I like it is because it's difficult, right? You could get some very big, strong legs if you came in, especially big legs. If you came in and you did full range of motion hack squats, you did your volume, you worked really hard, and you're hitting rep PRs all the way from 6 out to 20 reps. You're rotating through these rep ranges, you're crushing rep PRs all the time. Maybe you hit some split squats or some lunges. Maybe you did some hamstring curls, hopped on the adductor machine. If you followed this routine and you worked hard and then you went home, you ate a bunch, you ate like a hoss and you slept a bunch, you're gonna get massive legs, right? Absolutely no doubt. I would never tell you that you need to squat to have big, strong legs. Part of the reason that I kind of subscribe to this philosophy of free squats being a cornerstone of our leg training is because I am a little bit more of a strength-centric guy. And I find that if you take an athlete that has a really big back squat and a really big front squat and throw them on a leg press, they're gonna perform pretty damn well. Whereas if you take a guy, even with a strong, like full range of motion, hack squat or leg press, and we throw the reverse, we throw them into free squatting, he is not going to perform as proportionately well. So that's kind of the cornerstone of my philosophy is on some level, these free squats are harder. And I could understand saying, well, in some ways the hack squat's harder, right? Because we don't have to worry about balance and all these like small technical minutia. We can just focus on going hard and taking the set to failure. Yes, that is true, right? We can work really hard on the hack squat. Trust me, I've been there. I don't want to belittle hack squats. I think they are awesome. But I do like this idea that, okay, well, if I'm strong at this shit, then I could pick up anything else and get very strong at it very quickly. And that's kind of where the squats come into play. That is where the deadlifts come into play, is if you have a big deadlift from the floor, you have a big snatch grip deadlift, you have a big stiff leg deadlift, a big block pull. There's so many tasks that you could be new to and you could start doing them and you could excel very quickly, right? And that's kind of where it pivots into like what I like it for strongmen is, look, if I'm good at these things and there's an event coming up that I've never done before, maybe it's a side handle car deadlift. If I've got a fat front squat and a fat deadlift from the floor, chances are with 6 weeks of prep, I'm going to be performing very well. Whereas if you had someone who had been training nothing but side handle high deadlift pulls, yeah, they're gonna be awesome at that. But if we switch it and say, okay, well, they're prepping from a pull from the floor, their result is probably not going to be quite as good, quite as quickly as the other way around. So we're kind of looking for that hardest possible denominator. And I like pulls from the floor and I like free squats. And it's kind of the cornerstone of my training. I like that it's hard and I like that it prepares me to do any other task. I have a real soft spot for bodybuilding style leg training. I love it. It's just something I enjoy. It's just like, I had a true leg day in my program for years and years and years where I would get my squatting done. And I was like, finally done with that squatting bullshit. It's time to go kill myself on hack squats, split squats, go hard on the hamstring curl and calves, limp home, eat as much as I can and go to bed. And I would wake up and I feel like my legs are already bigger. And I absolutely adore that kind of training. And I try to incorporate it into my training. So I don't want to belittle that at all, but it is my kind of central philosophy of selecting these baseline lifts that have this level of difficulty to where you're not going to be finding something that is substantially more difficult, right? It's not like someone's gonna throw something that's even harder at you out of nowhere to where having a big front squat and a big back squat doesn't leave you pretty goddamn well prepared to excel quickly at this new task. Yeah, this is honestly just kind of rambling, but I thought it would be worth mentioning because I see on YouTube people get really caught up with this whole, do you need to back squat? Fuck no. I think back squatting is cool. I think front squatting is cool. So I back squat and I front squat. And that's kind of the rationale for why I like this basis of, well, lower body training at its core is squatting and then pulling. Is that how you maximally hypertrophy your lower body? No, you probably need some quad volume that isn't limited by your back. So maybe some leg extensions, belt squats, leg press, split squats, some kind of knee extension volume where you're not limited by your ability to brace and your lower back strength, right? You probably are going to need some knee flexion volume, right? Because even if you do all of these awesome stiff legs and RDLs, the short head of your hamstring doesn't cross the hip joint. So it's not getting worked by doing those RDLs to maximally hypertrophy the hamstring. We're probably gonna need to do some hamstring curls or some glute ham raises. You're gonna get pretty big adductors from doing squats and split squats, but if you wanna maximally hypertrophy it, you probably need to train it directly and hop on the adductor machine, right? So it's like, I don't wanna tell you guys that this is the end all be all and that all of these accessories aren't awesome. I just like to explain why I feel they are the cornerstone of lower body training. And I'm not saying that this is, oh, this is what all athletes have to do. No. I'm saying I am a meathead. Most of you guys that watch my channel are meatheads. I just like to at least put forward the path in being a meathead that has brought me my success. Now, between my superset of bodyweight calf raises, not bodyweight calf raises, single leg calf raises with a dumbbell, doing some different stretches and doing a little bit of ab work to get warmed up before I get into the front squats, I figured I could give you guys just some off the top of my head tips. Because I was thinking about it the other day. And I was like, well, what do I want to do with the YouTube? I don't foresee the channel ever being all that big, because what I do and what I appeal to, I don't think is the majority. It's a little bit of a niche thing inherently, and that is a-okay with me. So like, what do I want to do with it, right? I don't foresee myself striking it rich off the YouTube. So what is it? And what I like is that I have an audience of like-minded people who are following the same pursuit I am. I want to get really strong. I'm curious to see how strong I can get. So I'm pouring my heart and soul into trying to get stronger muscles. And it seems like a bunch of people who also want stronger muscles are curious to see how I am going about it. And I would guess that I am further along in that goal than most of the people watching. Maybe there are a couple of people that watch that are stronger or more advanced in this than I am. If so, hello. But I would say of the majority of people watch, I'm maybe a little bit further along. So what is the goal of my YouTube? Maybe to share or to suggest things for you to guys to try in your efforts to get stronger, because we all share the same goal. Maybe I possess some information that might help you along your way, and I would be remiss not to share that with you guys. This is just some off the top of my head stuff. Obviously, this isn't a video that I prepped for with some more nuanced answers, and it's gonna vary a ton from person to person, but let's say we are trying to get stronger in that general squatting musculature. We're trying to grow our legs. We're trying to get powerful legs that are going to yield the benefits of powerful legs, whether that be in athletic endeavors, whether that be in strongman events, whether that be just having a big squat, or whether that be having impressive legs. The two kind of tips that come to mind, if I was just like talking to someone at the gym, you guys are the guy at the gym, you asked me kind of what my general advice are. And the two really broad strokes that I've always found is one, you got to learn that training legs is really hard, and it's supposed to be hard, and you got to kind of love doing that, right? So you come in and it should be a point in your week that you're like, well, shit, this is going to be hard if you're doing a hypertrophy focused leg workout. Even leg extensions should be hard if you're actually taking them to the proximity to failure that you think you are. I posted on my Instagram the other day, just lots of people are claiming they're training their accessories at RPE 8, and if I offered them a $20 bill, they could hit like 10 more reps. And suddenly you're like, okay, well, is it even worth doing these accessories if we're not coming within that minimum threshold of proximity to failure to make this set valuable? You may as well go home and get the extra rest if you're not going to do them hard enough. So you're gonna kind of fall in love with killing yourself on your leg days if we want to really maximally hypertrophy the legs. Whether it be a leg press, a hack squat, a leg extension, a hamstring curl, a split squat, any of these exercises taken to actual reasonable proximity to failure is going to feel brutally hard compared to a lateral raise taken to mechanical failure, or a tricep taken to mechanical failure. There's a big discrepancy in perceived effort there, and that's something you gotta almost kind of like. You're like, fuck yeah, it's hard, that's why I do it. I do things that are difficult to get better at doing things that are difficult. It's always one of my big pet peeves is people are like, oh, well, you know, I hate split squats. Oh, when your coach gives you split squats. What's your complaint? That they're hard? They're supposed to be hard. I'm sorry that training is hard. Like, I don't really know what to tell you at that point if your only complaint is that they're difficult. That's why I've never really known what to make of that. It's the point. But we have to kind of fall in love with this idea of like, man, this is hard. That's the point. I'm excited to go see where I can push myself, right? And as soon as you learn to take yourself to that point and your 3 sets are actually 3 sets, you're gonna notice you have done a lot of damage to the body. Not in a bad way, but when we adequately tax something like a big muscle like the quad or the glute or the hamstring, there is a need for calories that I don't think is the same as if we adequately tax our biceps to put them in a position to grow. If we go do a hard leg workout, I think that there is an added demand for calories following that, just anecdotally. And I usually like to tell people that after your leg workout to bump your calories that evening. And I've found that every time I've ever done this, I've made really good progression. If you are someone who is cutting or trying to maintain and you're concerned about body fat, maybe you can trim those calories off of your rest day if you want to be absolutely sure that we're not adding to our net weekly caloric intake relative to maintenance, right? If you want to be really careful, trim that off of a rest day, but throw some extra calories after your leg day, after you learn to really go tax your legs. And I find that combo of just learning to go kill yourself when you go train legs and then fueling it and going to bed is step one. You're going to see a lot of leg growth just from those changes. And then the other thing that's just kind of a foundational principle in my mind for improving the squat is I think lower body training, mobility matters. I think that we all know, okay, well, training through a bigger range of motion elicits more hypertrophy. Well, does a little bit of stretching not potentiate training through a bigger range of motion? So assuming we then do the training afterward, right? Stretching isn't what's making us bigger, but stretching and then training through a greater range of motion potentially makes us bigger. And people will say, oh, well, isn't just doing your lifting mobility enough? And I would say on paper, sure, but I've met plenty of people who do their full range of motion lifting and are still horribly immobile, right? And it's at that point, well, you can't really do that much more lifting. Maybe we do a little bit of dynamic or static stretching, and then we can load these fuller range of motions and reap those hypertrophy benefits. So squatting is uniquely mobility dependent compared to deadlifts and benches and overhead presses and pulls. The idea is, okay, we want to be able to get into these positions and then we want to load them and get wicked strong. And I just find that viewing mobility and the ability to load these good positions should be kind of thought of as part of that process of improving your squat. I find that people who have really immobile lower bodies also really struggle to develop their low bodies. And I think that's kind of a chicken or the egg thing where it's like, well, if you knew how to really stretch your hamstring rather than round your back on your RDL, your hamstrings would grow. And if you had the ankle mobility to actually really load into the quad rather than hinging, your quads would grow, right? So it's like maybe a little static stretching can be what we do to get that ball rolling. And if you don't like static stretching, dynamic stretching is just fine. I just like static stretching. I just think it's part of my training routine in my head. And yeah, that would be tip number one. So if we're trying to get the squatting strength and the squatting musculature stronger, learn to actually train to the proximity to failure you're looking for, which is going to be fucking hard, and it's supposed to be. Fuel that newfound amount of damage you've done to your body, so that way you can adapt to it and recover, and then also realize that maybe you're having adequate mobility through the lower body is going to potentiate better strength and hypertrophy gains. So it's part of your training. It's not just something that like, oh, I should be stretching, but I don't, haha. Like, that's part of the training. You're supposed to do it. If you actually think it does something, you know, if you don't think it does something, don't include it in your training routine. Don't say you should have a nightly stretching routine. And if you think it does something, do it. That's kind of, those would be kind of the two that jump to my head that I would run into someone at the gym and mention, I guess. All right, I decided I'm going to get all of my main talking to the camera done before I start my big lifting. That way I can focus, right? That way I can kind of hit two birds with one stone, maybe make a decent video that people enjoy, but also have a quality training session, because I hate when I feel like making the video interfered with my ability to focus on training. So we're gonna try to get the best of both worlds today. So we're gonna kind of go over what would be my like same initial knee-jerk reaction to someone saying, okay, well, what kind of the basis is of where a lot of people need to just do better to get their deadlift moving. I would say, the first thing that comes to mind, right, is if you look at, you know, guys who are newer to lifting, the really angsty ones usually get pretty good at deadlifting pretty quickly, right? The guys who are, what do the Zoomers say? They're fighting demons, right? The guys who like go into the gym and they listen to some sad music and it's like some sort of weird pseudo self-harm. They end up getting a pretty big deadlift. Usually with shit form, but they end up picking up a lot of weight. So I'm not telling you to get a big deadlift, you have to be an angst lord. I'm saying, what can we learn from these people, right? I think it's coming in with this idea of like, this is going to suck to some degree sometimes, and I'm gonna do it anyway. It's gonna feel heavy, but I'm gonna commit to these pulls because I got nothing else going on in life, right? Hypothetically, we should be mentally strong enough to where we can be a perfectly content, happy person and still come in with that same level of conviction and go home and be in a good spot if we have sufficient mental strength. But I think that's what we can learn from them is you have to come in with like a level of conviction to doing the pulls. You got to commit to the pull. Just because it feels heavy doesn't mean you can't do it. So that's kind of barrier one to break through, is learning how to commit to these pulls, to do the fucking deadlifts, right? Everybody wants to gravitate towards a lower volume deadlift routine, but a lot of people are kidding themselves. They respond better to a medium volume deadlift routine. They just don't want to do that many more sets of deadlifting. They want to find what's the least sets of deadlifts I can do and then do a bunch of accessories. No, do more deadlifts. The only reason you didn't want to do that approach A wasn't because it didn't work great, it's because it's hard. And again, if your primary complaint is that something's hard, you maybe need to reevaluate. So I think one would be coming in with that intensity and learning to create that intensity from a place of not necessarily negativity is a great skill to have. So learning that intensity and commitment to the pull is one. I think where a lot of these angsty guys fall short is one, if lifting is just your expression of how much you hate your life, what happens when you get a nice girlfriend and things are actually going okay for you? You just stop lifting because that's all it was to you, is some weird self-harm. I've seen a lot of guys go through that. Which is pretty lame, you know. You can't push yourself when things are going well. I mean, if anything, it should be easier at that point. So that's one way they go wrong, but that's just kind of, I digress. As someone who's coached for a long time, I've lost a lot of clients to just getting a girlfriend and general happiness, which I'm always like, man, you do you, I'm happy you're happy, but goddamn, I thought you liked lifting weights, my bad. But the other place they go wrong is they've got this intensity. They've got this intensity down. They know how to get their adrenaline going, and they know how to commit to a pull. And that's taken them all the way up to X, Y, or Z deadlift, depending on how big the guy is, whether he's pulling sumo, conventional, whatever. That the number will vary, but he'll shoot up to this, like he'll pull PR, 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 PR because he understands intensity, but he doesn't understand technique, and the form eventually starts to limit his progression, right? And I've always said that 90% of deadlift form happens before you initiate the lift. If you can tension a really nice looking start position, the lift itself isn't very technical. You're just picking it up. So if we can get into a nice start position is A, and B, we can create a ton of isometric tension all before we actually start the lift itself, even if it's RPE 9 or 10, will feel relatively easy because we tried so hard beforehand. So learning to kind of load all of our effort to right before the lift will make it so a lot of less effort has to go into during the lift, grinding out a shitty lockout because you didn't tension a good start position. So I'd say learning this middle ground of, okay, I've got this adrenaline, I've got this intensity to commit to the pull, but I'm also going to be disciplined in my use of it. I'm going to get crazy tight, and I'm going to kind of use that angst and put it all before the lift and executing my cues, getting crazy tight, and suddenly picking it up felt easy. You got this great brace, you packed your lats, you're in a good start position. You're like, wow, that felt effortless, right? Even though it wasn't effortless, it was 90% of your max, but you can pick up 90% of your max and it feels relatively easy if you got uncomfortable enough before the lift. So I'd say that was kind of the first two that come to mind is we've got to learn to bring intensity, learn to get that adrenaline going a little bit, and then also develop really good starting mechanics and learn to preload the deadlift. And I think if you do those two things, you start making it really far. You don't necessarily even need to do a million accessories. If we're just doing enough deadlifting with those two foundational principles, we're going to make it a long way. Maybe we do get in our rowing because we find that helps, or maybe we do get in our direct ab work because it makes us feel healthier. Maybe we get in some hypertrophy works for the glutes and the hamstrings. These are all great. They are going to bolster our results, but the basis of moving forward in the deadlift is getting very technically sound, which to me is tensioning a great start position, and then learning that intensity. Kind of like how for the squats, we're looking to grow our legs, obviously. We need to fuel it. So we find that we find the intensity, and then just like how deadlift technical prowess, a lot of it is tensioning this great start position. I don't think some people are held back by their mobility, and then mobility would help potentiate their deadlift just as it does on the squat. But I don't think that's most people. I think that's some people. Whereas the squat, great technique is to some degree much more predicated on mobility. So it's kind of these same principles of we have honing our technique and then applying great intensity rather than just doing one or the other. Just like we'll have some guy who always squats 2 plates, but it looks great. And you're like, well, shit, man, if you just started applying some intensity to your training, you'd progress. Or, you have the guy who's got horrible form, but he's all in. And you're like, well, shit, man, if you had decent technique, you'd be lifting a lot of weight. We want to do both. We want to be the guy that does both. We want to identify which one we're doing badly. And then we want to go home and we want to eat. You got to eat, you got to sleep, and you'll get stronger. Okie dokie. Just got one more round of my giant set to go. So each side on calf raises. Gonna do a little bit more abs. I would say I'm just about done with my mobility. Feel pretty good to go. So I might just do a couple of hip thrusts as well, just because sometimes if I feel like I'm relying on shoving my knees forward more so than hinging at the hips, I can kind of fix that patterning issue just by throwing some body weight hip thrusts between sets. Kind of refresh my brain as to what it feels like to just load into the glutes a little bit more. We're always looking for a good balance between loading the quads and loading the hips, and what that good balance is depends on whether it's a front squat, a high bar, a low bar, right? So the balance is going to shift a little bit, but even on a front squat, there's such a thing as underutilizing the hips, which I have a bad habit of doing. So we're going to throw some in between just for like a motor patterning thing. But yeah, in the newfound efforts of like, okay, well, my idea with this channel is to talk to like-minded people pursuing this same thing that I have chosen to pursue, because why not? I think it's cool to have big muscles and be strong. You guys are pursuing the same thing. That's the point of the channel, kind of reassuring that in my head, which means you guys need to let me know, what do you need my advice on? I'm not going to say my help, right? Because that would imply that what I'm saying is a definitive correct answer, but at the very least, I can tell you things that have helped me overcome those hurdles, or athletes I've coached overcome those hurdles. What would you guys like to see that would help you most move forward? I'm just going to say, fuck it. I don't really care what gets the most views. What is going to help you guys move forward within your training? Let me know. Please let me know. I would like to get back into doing a little bit more nutrition-centric stuff, because really dialing in my diet has been one of the biggest things that defines when I'm making the greatest progression. Is having that really locked in a well thought out diet for me is just pivotal. I'm going to train hard regardless. So if I'm stalling, it's not because I'm not training hard enough. It's because a lot of the time I don't have my food locked in enough, and it's vital for me. Or Max's big thing is he needs to be sleeping well. So making sure you have like a dark, cold room. Really quick, because I gave them for the squat and I gave them for the deadlift. If I were to boil down benching, I would say to bench press often. Most people can and should bench press 3 days per week. You might find that you need to get your form more efficient to bench press 3 days a week without your body getting banged up. If you're mechanically inefficient, you don't have good tightness in your bench press, 3 days a week might thrash you. As you get more efficient, you'll probably be able to, your body will adapt to the imposed demands of 3 days a week of bench pressing, and it'll force some level of efficiency. Your work capacity relative to the task will come up. So that's kind of step one, is to bench press often and become pretty skillful at it, get really tight. I see a lot of people unrack the bar and they look very comfortable. They don't look uncomfortable, and that's how I know something is wrong, or at least that's how I've learned to bench press, is you should be very uncomfortable by the time you're unracking that bar. You should be wanting to get it off of you. Being uncomfortable, kind of the same as the deadlift, makes the actual lift itself a hell of a lot easier. So bench pressing often, becoming efficient at the bench press by doing so. We're looking to get stronger at a variety of rep ranges, maybe with some close variations on those 3 different benching days. Maybe you have 2 feet down, 1 Larson, or 2 feet down, 1 long pause day, if you feel, or maybe a Spoto day, depending on what you feel your deficiency in your technique is that you need to address, or deficiency in your development that you need to address. You could make 1 or 2 of those days variations that target that skill. So we're going to get bench press often, we're going to get skillful at it, and then we're just going to basically just be a bodybuilder. There you go, eat like a bodybuilder, have multiple meals through the day with a solid amount of protein. We kind of make sure our food is very consistent and regimented to facilitate maximum muscle growth. And after we finish bench pressing, we just go work hard on some bodybuilding work. We crush some press downs, some skull crushers, some pec flies, some overhead presses, and we grow our upper body, back included. If we just go after we finish bench pressing with the intention of just getting fucking jacked, and we also have an efficient bench press technique, I cannot think of many people that are very muscular I look at and say, wow, you have really good bench press technique, that also doesn't bench press a ton. I'm sure you could find someone who's jacked, who is not very skillful at the bench press and doesn't bench press a bunch. And I'm sure you could find someone who's very skillful at the bench press, who doesn't have very much muscle, who doesn't bench press a bunch. It's very rare to find the combo of both. So that can be kind of our road to that. And more or less the same principles apply to the overhead. A lot of the overhead press comes down to making sure you've got the mobility and the upper back development to have a good, well-balanced overhead position, the lat mobility to drive it back rather than always pressing out in front of us. But same kind of principles of getting skillful at the motion, doing it often so we become neurally efficient at it, and then just putting on muscle to be neurally efficient with. But yeah, please let me know as far as what I can do in terms of videos that will actually help move you guys forward. Because I think that's just going to be my metric of success for videos, is not how many views they get, not how many likes they get, not how many comments they get, but what videos actually drive forward people along this same path that I am taking. Okay, just finished up with the front squats, hit 440 pounds for one set of 2 and one set of 5. Decided to pause them today just so I could make sure I was achieving a good, consistent, and well-balanced bottom position. One of the things I'm big on in squats is you want to have a well-balanced bottom position, even front to back in the feet, before you start applying a little stretch reflex. The idea being, if you don't have a nice, well-balanced bottom position that you could pause in, and you're either being kicked forward by a lack of mobility or kicked back into your heels by a lack of mobility, chances are that when you then go to get some stretch reflex, you're not gonna bounce straight up. You're gonna be bounced forward or bounced back, right? So if we want to use any stretch reflex in our squat, it needs to be from a well-balanced position, and working on pause reps is a very good way to work on that. I think that pauses with the keeping tension in the quads is a very good variation for strength building. And then I really like pauses in the deepest position while maintaining tightness for kind of position development. So we did with pauses today, 440 for 5. Honestly, would be a decent set without pauses. With those quick little pauses, I know they weren't long. I'm not claiming they were. But all around, that was a very good set for me. So huge win. I don't feel too tired going into the deadlift, so hopefully we can do some good work over there. I'm gonna roll down my sleeves to put them over my shins like I do for deadlifts. Maybe do a core exercise or 2, just kind of make sure my core stays firing. We're gonna get after it. All right, so in the spirit, here I'm gonna go grab my belt so I can show you, in the spirit of kind of re-examining what the point of the channel is, just helping people with little tips that might apply to their training. I would like to include like a variety of levels, right? To where, you know, intermediate and advanced guys hopefully still enjoy watching my videos, not just lower level content, just like little things I can throw out there you can try in your training. Maybe you pick something up here and there, even if you know, are familiar with most of the major concepts and you've been doing this for a while. I hope to maintain like a level in my videos to where it's still good. One thing I thought I would mention, right, is there's a pretty wide variety of where people will put their belt. There is no one right. What does the belt do? The belt does not support your back magically. I think you guys know that. It's just giving you something external to allow you to push out against, so we can create a greater amount of intra-abdominal pressure. That is the role of belt. EMG studies show that with a belt on, we actually can activate our core more, so it doesn't turn off our core, yada, yada, yada. We're creating this pressure. It can greatly decrease the amount of stress on your lower back, not because the back part is supporting your back, but that intra-abdominal pressure makes it so the demands on our lower spinal erectors to keep our back flat are lessened, right? And on the Joe Rogan podcast, when he went on there, Rob Kearney said, oh, well, you can wear your belt to kind of support whatever the weak part of your core is. And I don't necessarily agree with that phrasing. I think one thing you can do with your belt, right, is if you know you have an issue, you can kind of use your belt position to help you kind of proprioceptively fix it, right? So if you're someone who's constantly too rounded, one thing you can do is a higher in the back, lower in the front belt position that kind of locks in a little bit more of an extended position, right? So if we're someone who's habitually kind of rounded over, we can reinforce a slightly more extended position. Or the reverse, if you're someone who's always squatting in extension, we find that we're always kind of arching our back. You might really like that high in the back, low in the front belt position because it's reinforcing the mistake you're already making, so it feels great. So what we might want to do in that case, and this is something that I've done myself as someone who has a bit of an issue in the past with squatting and extension, is taking it and going a little bit more parallel with it to even maybe going slightly higher in the front to help reinforce a little bit more of a ribs locked down position, so a slightly more flexed position. So we can kind of use it to correct in the other direction, right? And that might vary from lift to lift. You might have a bad habit of squatting and extension, but you don't have a habit of deadlifting and extension, so your belt position might vary in terms of like using it to feel, to crunch in. Maybe you crunch into the belt if you're looking to get into a little bit more flexion, which is something I've been doing on my deadlifts recently, right? I have said for a long time now, I have a theory. My theory is that as a guy with below average deadlift leverages who wants to be a very strong deadlifter, not just a strong deadlifter for poor leverages, I feel as though there's a chance I have to really master a thoracic rounded deadlift to improve my start position to get to that level. That is kind of a theory I've had. I have, knock on wood, a very robust back. While it will hurt all the time, I have never managed to hurt that thing, and I've done some stupid shit in the past. It is pretty goddamn robust. I've rounded my back a ton. It just doesn't seem to get injured. It's, I think, because I've achieved such a high level of development of my spinal erectors that I have a real kind of insurance policy. So that kind of checks the two boxes of, okay, well, I have the maybe core and back strength to make it so that this slightly more thoracic rounded start position isn't the most dangerous thing in the world. That's kind of step one. And two, I feel like I would benefit from it to improve my starting position, right? So, you know, I don't recommend that people never learn a more traditional style deadlift. I think everybody should learn more of a pure hinge. And then once you have that mastered, you can start leaning into crunching into the belt a little bit more, which is what I'm working on right now, trying to hone these positions of a slightly more rounded upper back. Yeah, and like there's some differences in like what we might need to build up, because then if you're pulling with a slightly rounded back, your spinal erectors become a little bit more of a primary mover rather than just isometric motion that's going to hold your spinal position. You're actually having to move it across the range of motion. But something I'm working on right now, and something that I've been doing, is fiddling with that belt position to find somewhere to where I can really feel in my start position. One of my cues is to crunch into the belt, as if I'm doing like a crunch on the floor. I use that belt as a check mark. When I feel like I crunch into the belt and it's expanding into the belt, it's gonna like kind of try to break the belt open, basically. And I'll take it a little bit higher in the front than I have in the past to try and reinforce this posture. So that's just something you could toy around with if you have differences in your torso mechanics that you would like to fiddle with. All right, gonna stop talking to the camera now that we're getting into deadlifts. So I'm gonna give a quick rundown. I mentioned how I'm leaning into slightly giving my thoracic away in the effort to gain a slightly more advantageous starting position. I think that this is a little bit more viable in strongman because you're allowed to ramp and you're allowed to hitch. You'll see some strongmen really lean into this strategy, especially with the use of the deadlift suit. Kind of crunching into the deadlift suit can potentially let you get even more weight out of it. You'll see guys, Mitch Hooper comes to mind, Ivan Makarov comes to mind, plenty of other guys will get into what looks like a not so great starting position where they're kind of really crunched into it, and it gives them a ton of power off the ground, but then they're gonna have a very difficult lockout. A, it's gonna let them get a little bit more out of their suit a lot of the time, and B, it's just like, it lets them get a bunch of weight to their mid-thigh and then figure out what to do with it from there, whether they need to scoot their knees under, whether they need to hitch it out. Lots of guys will pull well above what they could to like a powerlifting standard with the strategy of maximizing their leverages off the floor, maximizing the use of the suit to get it to the mid-thigh and figure out what you got to do from there. And because of that, you know, as a guy who I need to do everything I can to be a good deadlifter, not just a good deadlifter for a guy with short arms, I believe this is pretty viable for me. Maybe you need a little bit of extra upper back strength to undo that position you gave away off the floor. You probably have a resilient back. But like I said earlier, I definitely think that everybody should learn how to do more of a textbook style deadlift with a pure hip hinge before they starting to lean into this. Everybody's like, there are tons of people who never learn a pure hip hinge. They're like, no, this is what works for me. Tons of advanced deadlifters do this. You're not an advanced deadlifter. You're not doing it that well. Learn a hip hinge first. Lots of the time, if you're like, well, hey Sam, I fit the bill here. Anytime I do hard deadlifts, my back goes to shit. What do? I want to learn a pure hip hinge before I maybe embrace this a little bit. And what I would say is your back isn't weak, right? The reason it's bending and then unbending is because you're using your back as a primary mover. A lot of people will actually have very strong spinal erectors, and that's why they lift with a round back, is because they don't have the strength to move the weight with a pure hip hinge, so they begin using their spinal erectors as a primary mover because their body actually has more confidence in the strength of their back than it does in that hip hinging motion. And usually anytime I've got someone who has this really difficult inability to pull with a neutral-ish back, however we want to call neutral, right? Neutral is a range. It's not a fixed position. There is no angle that can be defined as neutral. Honestly, just spamming RDLs, maintaining, let's not even say neutral, just maintaining whatever spinal angle you began the lift with, aiming on maintaining that as low as you can with a pure hip hinge, doing a ton of those, gradually progressing the range of motion as your hamstrings get stronger and stronger. You're gonna be able to stretch them into a greater position. You're gonna get more comfortable with this hip hinge, usually because you're not pulling from that lowest point with a round back. You're actually going to be able to handle more volume on the RDL than you could ever handle on a deadlift from the floor. So you just spam a bunch of those and you kind of catch up that lagging deficiency, which is your pure hip hinging strength. And pretty quickly, that strength that you've built will start to show up more and more in how your regular deadlift looks. And once we have a decent amount of hip hinging mobility and strength, we can start transitioning from the RDLs over to dead stop stiff legs from the floor. Kind of where I would get to. And then if we do start leaning into the intentional rounding of the back to improve our start position, if you assess that you're someone who you feel this is safe, you feel that this is actually going to better your competitive outcome, usually I do like that. General rule of thumb is we don't want to see a ton of rounding super low in the back. Maybe it's not inherently injurious, assuming good load selection, but I do find that as soon as your lower back goes, you are looking at one hell of a lockout. It's reasonably viable to unround your upper back at the top of a deadlift without having to hitch it. Unrounding your lower back gets quite difficult. I think anecdotally, people have a very hard time controlling that. So when you don't have control, you have variance in position from how you trained to now how you're doing a heavy lift. That injury risk probably goes up. So I would look for then the advanced lifter to get really good at limiting that round more towards their thoracic. But that would be my general thoughts. Thankfully, the nice part about having a small YouTube channel as opposed to a big one is I don't get a bunch of fucking bozos coming in here like, oh, back round, shit form, haha, go into Snap City, when it's like objectively, if we look at the majority of the heaviest conventional deadlifts ever done, very few of them are from this ramrod straight back that these doofs think is ideal technique. Yeah, so it's like, you know, thankfully I don't have to deal with too many people, those people. They don't really make their way to really small fitness channels. So I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about this without having to have really asinine arguments in the comments. All right, last one before I stop talking. I'm just going to share with you something, just a lens that we can look at our deadlift technique that I think is plenty applicable to more advanced guys as well as less advanced guys. Something we'll like look at with Max's stuff when I'm cueing him as a very advanced athlete. First thing you have to understand is what you're cueing is not necessarily what's going to happen if I say, put all your weight into your heels. If you always are dumping all the weight off your heels at the bottom of your squat and your heels are peeling up, there's a good chance if I say, just fucking put all your weight on your heels. You say, well, that's technically incorrect. You want like 50-50 split. Awesome, man. If you go watch what ends up happening, right, it is an even split, right? So we can try to overcorrect and try to end up somewhere in the middle. First, we just want to understand that. And one thing that we can look at is what are we doing kind of with our scaps when we deadlift? You'll hear people throw around this idea that, okay, when we squat, we want back and down. When we bench, we want back and down. Some people will vary how much they're taking their scaps back on the bench press. It's a pretty popular thing to talk about now. Just like the squat, there's variance in where we're taking them, for sure. I'm not gonna say any otherwise, but that's the general direction that people advocate is back, down. The degree to which, like, if we think about a circle, right, we have this circle roughly, right? If we go too far back, our ability to go down goes away. If we go all the way down, our ability to go back goes away. So we can kind of find where on that back of the circle we perform the best. And you'll hear lots of very good lifters say, deadlift is the one lift where we're not taking them back and down, we're taking them straight down. So we're just kind of going to the bottom of that circle. And you'll see some guys will actually start going more towards the front of that circle, right? You'll see lots of very good USAPL, IPF sumo pullers will kind of use this strategy where they protract, depress, right? They have this hollow back position. And it just seems like within the current meta of powerlifting, if you're doing a sumo deadlift, you go here, 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 and down, and then you hyperextend at the top. That counts as getting your shoulders back. You can't hate the player, hate the game. I think that a lot of the time there might be a small discrepancy in how the two are judged. Whereas if you watched a conventional deadlifter who leaves his shoulders front and down, hyperextends at the top, I feel as though sometimes they'll get called on the soft shoulders more than sumo guys do using the same strategy. But I digress. Regardless, what I was saying is we can play around with where we are in this angle. And you see lots of beginners are like, well, no, you got to tighten up your lats. So they'll go way back, right? And it's like, no, you probably shouldn't be towards the back of that circle because we're effectively making our arms shorter. We're getting a worse start position. We're getting a worse lockout position if we're taking them back, especially not back and up at the top as a bodybuilder might. And we can play around with it. So if you're someone who like, okay, we have this idea that straight down is where most people should hang out, neutral-ish and depressed. But lots of people will find that when they're pulling, they're getting pulled forward. So again, we might want to overcorrect. We might actually cue down and back, right? To some degree, somewhere on that other direction towards that bottom right angle of, okay, we're kind of pulling them back a little bit because I know that when I'm actually in position, I'll actually end up at neutral, right? So it's like when Max is in his start position, he'll think about, okay, well, I'm just kind of thinking like pulling in roughly the angle of my torso is the direction, right? So it's like if we're here, he's gonna take it that away. And that's something we'll play around with is, okay, if we're feeling a little weak off the floor, we'll maybe protract a little bit more, feeling a little weak at lockout, maybe we'll take it back a little bit more. And in my case, that's exactly what I'm doing is I'm leaning into this slightly more rounded thoracic. So instead of going straight down, I'm actually going slightly more forward and down. Yeah, and that's something you can play with for yourself. If you're finding that you're constantly missing at lockout, you're constantly being pulled out of position, getting those scaps tugged away from you pretty bad, you can compensate by trying to pull them down and back a little bit more or vice versa. Okay, so I feel like I'm making really good week-to-week progress in the changes I'm looking for in my positioning. Over the last few training cycles, like before this one, I leaned into more of a true neutral back deadlift. I did some I think very pretty looking 700s where I think those same people that would tell me I'm going to Snap City would say, oh, that looks much better. You're using your legs, much better flat back position. And while that did make my lockout smoother, I think there's a little bit something to be said for everybody's gonna miss somewhere, right? So you could say, oh, well, if you're missing at lockout, that means you need to have probably a little bit more extended position off the floor and maintain it better. right? And you're like, okay, well, I did that, and now I miss at the knee. Cool, you've moved your sticking point. But is one sticking point inherently better than the other? Well, that depends. How much weight does it let you lift, right? So you could say, okay, well, now I've got this much flatter back position. I no longer miss at my lockout. I now miss off the floor, but I pull 20 pounds less. Unless you felt like you had a chronic history of tweaking your lower back, then it might be a net positive. You're like, okay, well, I'm taking a 20-pound step back, but now I'm gonna be able to accumulate way more training volume without getting hurt, and I'm sure I'll make up that 20 pounds quickly. Cool, you have a great rationale. I will leave you alone, right? But if it's just someone who's like, because you think it looks prettier, that could be okay too, but you have to kind of evaluate, okay, well, I've moved my sticking point, but is it a net positive? And I made these prettier looking pulls with a much flatter back. I got my head up a lot more. I got my legs into the pull, and it looked a lot more like what a textbook conventional deadlift might be. And I kind of shifted my sticking point downward a little bit, but I didn't feel like I had improved my strength. I found that actually most of the strongest deadlifts I've ever done were using this strategy of, okay, I'm going to compromise my starting position for a better start, and then figure it out when I get up there. Make sure I've got that surplus of upper back strength to get it done. I had found that actually yielded the best competitive results. So this training cycle, I kind of realized that, and hard work is seldom wasted. All those deadlifts I did with a flatter back just made my posterior chain stronger. So I'm coming back into this with stronger hamstrings. So I'm not worried about it. Hard work made me stronger. You know, the fact that I came in, I plugged in deadlift volume, I went home, I ate, I slept. I'm a stronger person for having done it. But I realized, I'm like, okay, what is the goal? The goal is to pick up the most weight possible. Yes, that deadlift looks prettier. I'll get more compliments on my technique, but it's not pushing me in the direction that I want to. So this block, I'm like, okay, let's go back towards that old strategy, but try to do it in a really controlled manner. Also, I was just talking to the guys in the Discord. You'll hear a lot of discourse about, oh, don't copy advanced lifters. They might be on steroids. They might have different leverages than you. And I've talked about this in the past, how lots of people will try to squat. They'll see like Lu Xiaojun squat, and they'll be like, oh, beautiful upright. And then there's some 6'2" long, all femur dude, and they just get emotionally distraught when they cannot squat upright to save their life. And they think they're doing something wrong, when it's like, no, you're trying to emulate someone who's built very differently from you, right? So you can't just copy someone because you think their lift is beautiful, but you can select different people who you're like, okay, well, this guy has the same relative strengths as me. This guy maybe has similar limb lengths to me, and is also better at lifting weights than I am. Doesn't mean stronger, right? There are probably people who are stronger than me, not probably, I've met people stronger than me who are bad at lifting weights. They're just really strong, whether that be genetics, whether that be gear, whether that be raw effort and time, but they're not very skillful at lifting weights. I might find someone who deadlifts 150 pounds less than me, but I think they're very skillful at deadlift, so I can still absolutely learn something from watching them if I feel our leverages are similar or our strategies are similar. And I was just telling the guys in the chat, I was like, open discussion. Who are people you like to look to emulate some aspects of their technique? You don't have to emulate the whole thing. It could just be like, oh, well, watching Eric Spoto bench, I get a really good feel for what it looks like to have really elite ability to load into your triceps during the negative, kind of load them as you come down, load the pistons, explode back upward. That would be one of mine, right? I often will watch Eric Spoto for what elite tricep loading on the negative looks like, and I'll often watch Sebastian Oreb for what I like to do as far as my scapular mechanics. And those are like the two guys I'll watch as examples of trying to get better at lifting weights, not just stronger, right? We're always trying to get better at lifting weights and trying to get stronger. Just like how back when I boxed, it makes sense. Oh, I'm gonna watch a guy who's better at boxing than me, and maybe it'll give me some ideas. I can't copy him verbatim because I am not him, he is not me. He has developed a style to best perform for him, but there's aspects, there's things I can gain from watching people better than myself, and the same thing applies to lifting weights. Even though it's generally considered a less skillful endeavor, there's skill in anything we do, right? And yes, it's less skillful than a combat sport, but there's still a skill component. We can learn a lot from watching people better than us, but it just can't be, oh, well, I'm just gonna copy everybody that's better than me. And so I would like to open this discussion in the YouTube comments as well. Who are people that you guys look to as far as maybe they have similar limb lengths, maybe they've got similar stance widths, You're like, oh, well, I'm a wide stance squatter. I've kind of found that works better for me. So I go watch this guy for what wide stance squatting at an elite level looks like. Or I'm a narrow grip bencher, so I watch this guy for what benching at an elite narrow grip looks like. Or he's got the same limb lengths as me, so I probably should start to try what he's adopted as strategies. Or this guy's got crazy strong quads. I've got strong quads. I'm trying to be like him, right? Who are your guys' go-tos? I've mentioned that my go-tos on the bench generally for people I like to watch who are more skillful than myself would be Eric Spoto and Sebastian O'Rip. Who are yours for any lift? Okay, so that was a fat overshoot. I was supposed to leave one in the tank. Should have just taken the set of 5, which I think would be a PR. But I got greedy and I did a 6th one, hitched it out. I'm a strong man, it counts. Big old rep PR. I will take that. Now we're gonna move on to some accessories and move on and go eat and sleep. I think all I've got for accessories today, like I said earlier, I moved the lion's share of my hamstring and back work to be distributed across other training sessions. Might just do some hammy curls for fun because I like hamstring pumps. Maybe some leg extensions if I feel like it. But the only thing that's like officially on the docket is some cable crunches for some extra ab work.